Welcome to Wemcast, the home for adventurers and maverick medics worldwide. This session is about reviewing the online content that we produced during lockdown. Lockdown gave us a unique opportunity to connect with medics on a worldwide basis. And over the period, we managed to collate some really fascinating, some exciting, some really insightful sessions with some really fascinating people. And in this session, the three of us, Eoin Walker, Will Duffin, and myself, Mark Hannaford, are choosing our three favourite sessions, ones that have given us insights into our own careers, into our own lives. And we'd love to share these sessions with you to signpost you to these particular highlight sessions. With me on the podcast is Dr. Will Duffin and Eoin Walker. Eoin, good morning to you. You're in Cairo, I hear.
Morning, Mark. Indeed, I'm in Cairo on this hot and lovely morning. So thanks for the introduction, Mark. And indeed, just reviewing our sessions, I'd just like to kick off with my favourite session from the duration of the pandemic. So it was Wemcast number 56 with Jeff Allen. And this session was titled The Journey, Not the Destination. And it was a really fantastic session for a number of reasons, really. So Jeff is a world-class kayaker. And in this episode, we discuss his career and the trauma from his time in both the military and the acute divorce from his first wife. So what I loved about the session is just his honesty and candid replies. And it genuinely took me back and allowed us to focus on how he moved through his battles of being stripped from everything, but and also his need to survive on the ocean. So he talked about his commitment to the blade, which is his commitment to the paddling, and how he embodied and processed a lot of anger in his paddling through the water. My key take-homes from this session, Mark, really were just taking on the adventure into the outdoors can and is a psychological journey sometimes as much as a physical one. It can really help you process and reorder some of the damaged or difficult experiences by giving you time to think about the experiences and process them. Jeff's circumnavigation of Japan illustrated just this, and just how he uses nature to really just get back to the basics of interacting kinesthetically with the water and his surroundings, but just really about how he interacted with his own mental health, because I really think that our own mental health can be the source of predation and danger if we don't deal with it acutely at the source. So that certainly was my first favourite session of the summer. So I'll hand over to Will for his first session.
Cheers, Eoin. Yeah, I really enjoyed your conversation with Jeff. Just on that note, I mean, he's a proper salty sea dog, isn't he, Jeff? The stuff he's done, circumnavigated Japan and then Ireland as well. And I what really touched me in your conversation with him actually was the way that he was in the military, and that wasn't his choice. He felt that he was pushed in there by his father. And he left the military. He's left with this kind of existential crisis, didn't know what to do with himself. And kayaking was kind of this way of him kind of rediscovering himself. And it was just this, the way he describes it, it's just this, using adventure like that. It's this kind of powerful kind of medicine. It was amazing for me.
Absolutely.
I think,
absolutely.
Will, as a kind of fellow sea kayaker, certainly not at the level of Jeff, but sea kayaking is one of those few sports, and I'd recommend it to everybody, that where you really have to concentrate on what you're doing. You have to watch the sea. You have to keep your paddling regular. You need to be aware of risks and dangers around you. And it's one of the few sports where if you get yourself into trouble, nobody's going to come and get you. You know, there's no ambulance waiting around the corner. There's no sort of, rescue team. You know, you're out in the big, wide blue yonder, and it actually is really quite isolating. But consequently, it really takes up all of your mental capacity. You don't have the time and the space to really think about all the issues that are going on in your life. You can park them and let your subconscious deal with that. So for me, and I think probably, Jeff would say the same, kayaking is almost like hypnotism. It really takes your mind to a different place. So yeah, as a kayaker, as well as like Jeff, well, not the same sound as I said as Jeff, but I would recommend it for people. If they get the opportunity, they should try it.
Cool. So yeah, my first pick, and it's, you know, it's been so difficult to pick three because we've all had these amazing conversations, and I've grown as a person over the last 5 months just speaking to all these people. So this is completely arbitrary. But staying on the kind of military theme, so Jeff reflected on how he struggled to adapt to life after the army. You know, this is a similar story in that sense with Martin Hewitt. This is episode 107. This was recorded in June, released in July this year. Martin was in the army. He was serving in Afghanistan, and he tells this incredible story where he took a bullet wound to the just above his armored vest into the shoulder. During a firefight, he was pulled out of the battlefield with major bleeding by the MERT team, and he was put to sleep and had lots of surgeries at Camp Bastion, and then he was evacuated back to the UK. And just his story about that point in his life, and then subsequent his recovery. So he lost the use of his right dominant arm, and he had to relearn to write. Everything in his life, you know, his whole military career, he was a very sporty, active guy. That was all just gone, and he had to just completely rebuild himself. And I've done a bit of work with Help for Heroes with veterans of conflict who've got all kinds of injuries. And I've had a sense of what it might be like to be in that kind of environment through them, and the kind of the journey that they go on to rehabilitate and recover. But the way he speaks in this episode, I think is very, very honest, and it's a very raw, kind of no frills account. And it just, what he's gone on to achieve following this is just blown me away. So he went on to represent Great Britain in the adaptive sports world in downhill and slalom skiing, and he had this kind of glittering sporting career. Then that wasn't enough for him. He went and set up the Adaptive Grand Slam, which is a little bit like the Explorers Grand Slam. So the 7 summits and the North and South Pole, but for people with disabilities, and not just veterans of the armed forces, but anyone with a disability. And his whole kind of his why behind this is not just about him and his own recovery, but he wants to use his experience to enable other people to get out into really extreme environments and really find themselves and give them that drive, that focus, that passion back that many of them will have lost in the wake of that life-changing injury. So yeah, I just found Martin a really, really interesting guy to talk to, and that's one of those episodes that kind of resonates with me even now.
I think what's really interesting, Will, about that episode is Martin's mindset and just his can-do approach. And I think whenever I'm struggling in life or struggling day to day, you just, if you listen to that session, what it allows you to do, it allows you to transcend anything you're struggling with, because you appreciate that actually, versus someone who's lost complete function of their arm and is still able to overcome. So I think what I got from that session myself was just his tenacity and his sort of spirit of overcoming. Really, it was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, an amazing story, and a testament to his individual, or his internal strength and fortitude, isn't it? It'll be interesting to see what he goes on to do next.
Yeah, he's a really, truly remarkable guy. Okay, so Mark, your turn. What's your first episode choice?
Well, like you, Will, we've had such a spread of episodes of people speaking and being interviewed. Do you know, it runs a whole gamut of not only medicine but also life. And I think one of my favourite sessions, and it is really difficult to choose because there were so many extraordinary sessions, is episode 96 with JD Polk. JD Polk is the chief medical officer at NASA, and he was during a period when these guys were so busy, was gracious enough to give us an hour of his time. Actually, it ended up being about 3 hours because the first recording didn't work. Yeah, and it's a testament to JD that he said, "Don't worry, let's do this again tomorrow," and we re-recorded the whole session. So, a lovely person to speak to. And he gave us some time just after the Dragon launch, so the first sort of commercial launch into space with astronauts aboard. And it was really a turning point in human history where we started to move as a species away from purely servicing the International Space Station, which has been a remarkable endeavor all by itself, to actually looking beyond the International Space Station to putting a permanent base onto the moon, which potentially will replace ISS because that's coming to the end of its natural life, and using that in itself as a launch pad to go to Mars. I think it's, it keys in well with that human spirit that you were just referencing just now, Will, with Martin, that desire to explore and to push boundaries and to literally reach for the stars. JD describes NASA's ambition for space travel, and indeed sort of that sort of global desire for space travel encompassing other agencies in China, Russia, and so on, with such enthusiasm. And he's clearly a man that has lived his subject for his entire professional life, because his depth of knowledge is just absolutely incredible. The medical benefits to these types of journeys, he elucidated really clearly. That's there is a why. Why should we go to Mars? And he was very clear on the reasons why he sees that, and why the agency as NASA sees that as being extremely positive to the human race in totality. So it was one of those conversations that was just, I could have sat there, I have to admit, and sat there for hours and hours just talking to JD, because his mind is like an encyclopedia. But he explains it in a way that even intellectually challenged people like myself can understand and really get into the topic. So the session with JD Polk, I have to say, would be one I highly recommend, because not only is he fascinating to listen to, it's also it's a turning stone of human history. And 3 days after the launch of the Dragon capsule, and I think it's a testament to the WEM community and the people that are attracted to this community, that he gave us his time and delivered a brilliant session, I have to say.
I had the pleasure of meeting JD at last year's conference, and it's hard to believe he's the medical director of NASA, because he's such a dude, isn't he?
He is such a dude.
He's such a great guy. And one of the things I loved about that episode, he's such a visionary as well. And the stuff he's talking about, you got to listen to this episode. He talks about 3D printing drugs in space. That blew me away. So instead of having to work out what meds you need in your med kit, it's all organic compounds. He reckons you can just kind of print them up in space when you need them. So you've just got the printer, and off you go. Just stuff like that. It's just like mind blown.
It is, and the applications of that type of scientific advance on Earth, are limitless too. And it was also quite nice. I really enjoyed the fact that he comes from a similar background to us. So he was used to jumping out of helicopters, and came from an expeditionary background, which was really nice to hear. So he views stuff through a similar lens, I guess, to the way that we do as well. So it was as interesting to hear about how he got to his position as it was to hear about the amazing vision that they have as an organization. So it was an absolute pleasure talking to JD, and you're right. It's hard to imagine, well, that's the wrong way of putting it, isn't it? But his accessibility, you would think somebody in his position would be very hard to get hold of, very hard to sort of to get some time, but he's so generous with that, and his accessibility is amazing.
What really struck me from your session with him, Mark, was just his sense of collaboration. And I think it's a real testimony to the fact that actually, if we're going to get ahead in life, we have to collaborate with other minds, other cultures, other specialities. And actually, no man is an island. No organization is an island. Even NASA indeed relies heavily on the Russians, relies heavily also with collaboration with the European Space Agency, and it is a collaborative approach. And even in his journey in his career, he's had to both collaborate and also start from a very humble place. So I think I really took away that sense of, you know, opening your mind to various collaborations, because they can lead you and help you and guide you and also teach you.
And we're very much hoping that JD will be able to join us for the online conference, so WEM20 virtual. He's going to try and carve out some time for us, and you know, we're hopeful that we'll hear, you know, what he's been doing subsequently since the Dragon launch, and also you know, drill down into some of the details that we talked about in the podcast itself. So I think Eoin, is it on to you now for your next session?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. So my next session is Wemcast number 106, which was also a live Wemcast session called Thriving versus Surviving with Dan Richards and Victoria Lebrecq. And I think one thing that's come out really from the summer and from all of our sessions really is this sort of thriving through adversity, and this theme of thriving through adversity. And it's a good analog actually for the summer, because, you know, in this pandemic, we have had to thrive clinically and individually through adversity and through some really adverse times. So I think actually we've probably reflected it quite nicely within the Wemcast sessions. But this session certainly was so. So thriving versus surviving. Dan Richards, Victoria Lebrecq. Dan lost his right arm in a motorcycle accident in 2009. Had a very difficult rehabilitation. Spoke quite candidly about his near-death experience, his near-suicide experience. Then started to piece by piece rebuild his life, and started to found a love for cycling. Also started to find a full-time job, and ended up through a process of mentoring and joining different clubs and different social events, ended up cycling in the Invictus Games. But that is just one of a number of amazing stories to his testimony of really thriving through adversity. And again, very much to Will's last podcast he was mentioning with Martin, just that absolutely tenacious coming to bedrock, and then from bedrock, that tenacious approach of rebuilding step by step, brick by brick, back to not only being functional but being excellent and successful at the same time. Very much Victoria Lebrecq's story as well. So 2014, she lost a leg. She was crushed under a lorry while cycling to work. And she talks about just really her adjustment to new baselines, and just also revealed the character and tenacity required to overcome just some daily challenges, like how walking again, learning to clothe herself again, learning to manage pain, acute and chronic pain. But my key learning through it all, Mark and Will, really was just the incidence of a traumatic event can sometimes be the beginning of a new challenge and a new life and calling. And sometimes adversity, although we never choose it, can actually create greater character development in us. And, you know, the pinnacle of their examples, you know, Victoria swimming the channel with one leg, Dan Richards cycling for the Invictus Games with one arm. These are stories which can't help but absolutely inspire you and cause you to absolutely rethink adversity.
Yeah, they're two phenomenal human beings, Owen. It was interesting in your episode. I think that's the first time they met when you recorded it, and they were actually quite interested in each other's story, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. And I can't remember which of them said, whether it was Dan or Victoria, but they said that life-changing injury was the best thing that ever happened to them, because it opened up new opportunities and new frontiers that they just wouldn't otherwise have even known about. And that's a complete paradigm shift, isn't it, from how you'd expect recovery from a traumatic event to be. Absolutely.
You just think to say that, but actually what rebounded him into a whole new world and a whole new domain of skill and practice. So he's for him to say that's really powerful, because he certainly had a roller coaster event.
I was going to say the energy between the two of them at the end of the session was quite remarkable to hear, and you know that they're going to link up and do, because Victoria works for I can't remember what the charity's name is. Owen, can you remember? It's a cycling safety organisation.
Yeah, it's called Road Peace.
Road piece, yeah. And then, you know, Dan was, it sounds like Dan's going to get heavily involved with road piece, which is a great sort of output from that session.
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, again, collaboration and just awareness into cycle safety and just safety in general. But very much that tenacious approach and that collaborative approach. So, Will, over to you. What's your next favorite session in the summer?
Thanks, Owen. So my next pick is episode 90. This was recorded in May. What has led to a climate of fear in frontline healthcare with Dr. Kathy Ryan. And this episode, for me, came at a time when I think we were all in the immediate what's just happened phase of the pandemic. We were all just kind of reeling to try and understand what was going on. And those of us who are frontline health workers were suddenly having to adjust to this whole new disease that we didn't really understand. There was a lot of fear around what was going to happen to society and to our patients and to us and our families. And it's so many unknowns. This combined with the fact that the direction of travel with clinical practice has very much been towards the defensive end of practice. And that's been driven by litigation, by more sessional working, by perfectionism within health workers. And this is something we explore in this episode. But Kathy's a very senior clinician. So she's the director of the integrated urgent care in Bristol area. So, really, really senior clinician. And in this episode, she reflects very candidly on some of the biggest mistakes she's made in her career, some of the, where she's really kind of dropped the ball, so to speak, but was then able to grow and reflect from that, and it hasn't made her more defensive in her practice. And this came, we all, I've dropped the ball. We all do it as clinicians because we're only human, and I think it's really important that we have an honest conversation about how we deal with this in our clinical work. And this, she's kind of promoting this concept of courage-based medicine. Everything is pushing us towards being fearful. And we did a literature research, and there's the only academic paper on courage in healthcare dates back to 1909. So there's just a massive dearth of conversation around this. So I felt like we'd really perhaps started something that could really grow into something bigger. And this idea of just owning your decisions, accepting and holding clinical risk. And I think in the time of COVID, that kind of whole mindset is never been more important. And within the episode, there's a really great toolkit that she outlines, fear setting as an exercise you can do with your team, and that there's kind of worksheets for that in the show notes that you can access. But yeah, this really reminded me of what it means to practice in a courageous way, and how our patients need that from us more than ever right now.
Yeah, well, I think it's really surprising that there's such a dearth around this topic, isn't there, in terms of healthcare, and it's such an important element of a clinician's job is to be courageous, but also to have to live with the decisions. Not everybody is going to make good decisions all of the time. That's an impossibility. So it's living with the not making such good ones all of the time, and that's what makes us human, isn't it? But yeah, surprising and shocking that there's such a dearth of resource on that.
So I would just echo that really around how difficult it has been, and you can get this decision-making paralysis when difficult decisions do get difficult. But actually stepping up and making difficult decisions is sometimes the best thing you can do. And so bearing very much testimony like you do, Will, to clinical practice over the summer, and the overwhelming nature of some of the cases and demand versus supply. But in the face of that, not shying away from those difficult decisions. And I think that was a really prominent point that she and you brought forward, and stayed with me from your session.
Yeah. And I think all of our guests really, they embody courage to some extent, and extreme medicine as an entity is practicing medicine in unconventional, hostile, austere environments is in itself is a very courageous act. And I think that's something it's a thread, it's a theme that I think is going to be, we're going to develop even further. So yeah, watch this space. Mark, over to you.
Well, thank you for that. So my next session is 101, Witchcraft, Sleeping Sickness, and a Passion for Medicine, the remarkable life of Dr. Victor Cande. It's one of our shorter sessions, but I have to say it's one of my, there's so much in this session that it's really sort of signatory. So I interviewed Ilan Moss, who was the filmmaker for the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, which is an offshoot of MSF, which was founded with the money awarded to them when they were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And it's a story of Victor Cande he was a Congolese doctor. Now, what was amazing about this story is one person's impact on humanity in his country, indeed, in fact, in a much wider field. So Victor was a doctor who'd spent 40 years combating sleeping sickness, which most of the audience will be very aware of. But it's a disease that, if unchecked, can turn you mad, and is pervasive in the Congo. The existing treatment was an extremely old-fashioned one. It wasn't particularly good at treating the disease and had lots of side effects. Victor drove an initiative in Congo to run clinical trials, and he ran clinical trials for over 2 million people, developing a new drug, getting it clinically tested, but getting it clinically tested and authorized within Congo rather than bringing it to a sort of westernized pharmaceutical setup. He gathered resources, gathered people, gathered momentum, so that this all happened within Congo. And it's singularly due to his absolute passion and drive. Lots of other people, he drew people into him, he drew resources, he drew funds to fundamentally change medicine and the treatment of sleeping sickness within Congo himself. The film that Ilan Moss made was a winner at the Health for All Film Festival, and it's a really beautifully made film which shows the amazing hurdles that they overcame in Congo to get this drug sort of accredited and to be widely accepted as being a treatment for sleeping sickness. But it also shows some of the success stories of the people that were treated by this new drug and the outcomes, and seeing the before and afters is truly remarkable. And it's a drug that can be used easily in a Congolese setting, in an African setting where logistics are difficult, where there's climatic extremes, where medicine is more extreme. It's harder and it's tougher to deliver it. And Victor came up with an elegant and beautiful solution that transforms people's outcome in Congo, and I would suggest sort of in a wider African setting. And Drugs for Neglected Disease Initiative in itself is an interesting organisation, one which is very interesting to highlight too. So that was one of the shortest sessions, but I have to say one of the most beautifully shot and fascinating sessions, which highlighted so many good and strong points, and that highlighted that you as an individual can make significant change. You don't necessarily have to be part of a massive organization. It's your passion that's important, and your dedication to your goal, and having goals like that. And you can change the world with one person.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this episode, Mark. And the film A Doctor's Dream, which you can watch on YouTube, it's open access, and the links we'll put in the show notes. It's just a really nice piece of filmmaking that really shows the impact of sleeping sickness or trypanosomiasis on the local communities there in the Congo. And it's just fascinating for me to learn that all the treatments up to now have been so poor and also so deadly for patients. So arsenic was one of the main treatments that they were using. It killed 1 in 20 of the people that were treated with it. And so this revolution in having the first safe oral treatment for trypanosomiasis is a massive step forwards. And it's a truly neglected tropical disease. It's great to see some work and some exposure in this area.
I think that's Go ahead. Owen.
Oh yeah, no, just that principle of it. You can always make things better. There's always, if you've got that ethos of continual improvement, and that you can just every time you go to work, you consistently looking for ways to improve and not just accepting the baseline as is now, especially as Will said, especially if it's actually quite detrimental. But just the ethos there is that showing up with a mindset of continual improvement, you can always make inroads. Quite rightly, Mark, as you said, as an individual, the amount that you can affect an organization, a culture, and/or a people group is fantastic.
And hopefully we'll hear more from the from that group who are based in New York, and highlight some other stories of their remarkable work around the globe. So, who's next? Owen, I think it's your turn to give us your next session.
Yes, thanks, Mark. So this is my final favourite session from the summer. And this was WEMcast Live Events number 14 on the WEM Academy. And it was the human factor with Gareth Locke. And so I find human factors absolutely fascinating, actually. And Gareth is a professional diver and also as an ex-RAF LO master, talked about the importance of non-technical skills, including CRM, situation awareness, and moving away from your own bias. He also talks about no-notice drills, so really calling on your subconscious competence and being prepared to mimic real life by quick action routines. So I find Gareth an amazingly fascinating character for a number of reasons, really. Only because he really is the definition of preparedness. So he truly prepares, and he's got that critical eye. So he looks to where systems might be at risk or indeed weak, and especially over the summer, the amount of CRM opportunities and circumstances that I've personally faced, and we've probably all faced, have been absolutely sort of proliferated. So it really recognizing those, and recognizing when you eat in yourself or other people, you're hungry, angry, late, tired, all these kind of human emotions, which you need to mitigate to provide a well-functioning team and individual. So I find his mindset really fascinating, and just talking about the nuances of communication in closed loop comms and useful acronyms such as SBAR, situation, background, assessment, recommendation, pressure, because we have been under pressure, I feel, this summer, quite fight easy, and then his sort of questioning mindset as well. But my key learning really was about preemptively managing fatigue and difficult nonverbal communication in stressful environments. So almost coming into it preemptively and predicting it before it occurs, fighting against your own bias, be that confirmation bias, outcome bias, reporting bias, and then also some of Gareth's methods of error trapping as well, which are absolutely fantastic.
I really like Gareth's approach. He's very no nonsense, isn't he? And the way he integrates the theory with some of his own experience working in extreme environments. He's a master diver under the ocean, which is a kind of environment where stuff can go wrong very quickly. You've got to be on it. And I think the learnings that he's taken from that, we can translate to any extreme environment. He's just such a fascinating guy to listen to. So yeah, great episode, Owen. Good job.
I think, Will, you've just touched on something that something I think this is common with all the sessions, that whilst typically we're interviewing clinicians or people involved with medicine, although not exclusively, within all of those sessions, there are lessons that can be taken away and applied to everyday life. Whether that's your clinical career, whether that's your normal everyday life with relationships and, all the stuff that goes on an everyday basis. So, I've been really astounded by some of the stuff that's come out of our sessions that can be used every single day.
Yeah, so I fundamentally agree with that, Mark. I think one of the real comparisons and commonalities between extreme medicine and such as diving and aviation, and clinical practice, day-to-day clinical practices, that when things go wrong, they can go wrong really quickly. And actually what we need to ensure is that we can see 5, 10, 15 minutes into the future. We can get to stuff before it gets to us, so we can address it before it really starts to affect our dynamic. And within extreme medicine, things can really change so quickly, and from an extreme environment perspective, and if you're not acutely aware of that preemptively, it's a real game changer. So you're right, pulling some of those non-technical skills and sort of cognitive skills into extreme medicine is absolutely valuable.
I mean, one of the again common themes is with the clinicians that have been speaking, how making extreme medicine part of their career has, to their mind, made them better clinicians. And I think it's that problems, like as you were saying, Owen, it's that problem solving, it's that risk assessment, it's that team working, it's developing communication skills. Whilst in an extreme environment, you will develop clinical skills. A lot of the benefit is actually in those non-clinical skills. It's all the stuff that makes you work better as an individual because you're coping with your stress better, or makes you a better team member, so that collectively as a team you deliver better results.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fundamental. It across our courses actually is instilling those non-technical skills that aren't necessarily taught or learned within the clinical domain. Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Will, you're...
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that, the wilderness, the outdoors environment is the perfect training ground to develop those non-technical skills and bring that back to your clinical practice in your usual workplace. Yeah.
Absolutely. So Will, over to you for your final session.
Thanks, Owen. So episode 75 was with Glenn Singleman on responsible risk-taking. This was released on the 11th of May. When I found Glenn, I almost couldn't believe he existed, because he's just had the most outrageous career. So he's an emergency department physician out in Australia, but he's worked with James Cameron. He's been down to the wreck of the Titanic, and he's also had this career in mountaineering, high altitude base jumping, and wingsuit flying, which he does with his wife, Heather. They're this kind of husband and wife team. And he now does all this kind of corporate speaking work, talking about risk taking and what he's learned as a doctor and an extreme sports athlete. And he embarked on all of this during the 80s, in the kind of the heyday of where base jumping and wingsuit jumping was really kind of it was literally taking off. And the thing I took away from this, two key learning points for me. First of all was around his approach to fear. And I think any of us working in extreme medicine, we're putting ourselves in risky environments, and how we process that fear. And his approach to that is one of just meticulous training and preparation. So when he gets to the edge of doing the jump, he knows he's rehearsed that jump. He's done all of his checks. And he recognizes that fear within his brain, it's his kind of primitive reflex. He recognizes that's there, but he's got this prefrontal cortex, and he's able to override that. He's kind of got this awareness that the fear is there, and he says, "Thank you, fear, for notifying me that there's danger ahead. But I've done my checks. I know what I'm doing. I'm okay to proceed. Let's do this." And he steps out and he jumps, jump off a cliff in the Himalayas, and off he goes. And I just listen to the episode to get the detail, but just his whole way that he prepares himself mentally to take these immense risks and transform them from being irresponsible to what he calls responsible risk taking is a real game changer for me. And the other thing was, I always thought that extreme sports athletes were just searching for adrenaline all the time. Turns out they're not. He's actually looking for something called flow, which is this kind of activated state where you're truly engrossed in a task. You lose this sense of self, the sense of time, the inner critic is silenced, and you're performing at this just incredible level for you. So he describes what it feels like to be in a flow state, and we unpack this a little bit in the episode. And having had this conversation with Glenn, I went and tried to access the flow state when I'm playing tennis in my tennis league, and I've been just forgetting about what game I'm in. I've been trying to forget about this the doubt and disbelief and all of the kind of psychological anguish that goes along with a game of tennis, and just focusing one point at a time and just get myself into that flow state. And I swear to God, my tennis playing level, without having improved my game, has gone up by 20% just through learning about the principles around flow. And I think any activity where you're trying to perform at a high level, where you're trying to kind of do battle with yourself, I think would benefit from the approach that Glenn outlines in this episode. So yeah, go check it out.
Yeah, Glenn's session was amazing. He, you know, a lot of the stuff he was espousing is very similar to a special forces approach in terms of, you know, meticulous preparation and practice. And the concept of flow is, you know, if you've never experienced flow, then you've missed something significant in your life. I have experienced flow at times, doing some stuff, and it's a remarkable state of mind to get into. And if you could access that easily, then that's a big tool for life.
So I agree, actually, and it was a fantastic session because he's achieved so much over the span of his life. But you're right. Just listening to how he switches his amygdala response off. So, you know, your amygdala, your fight or flight, and being able to silence that and or at least turn it down. And quite rightly, as Mark said, that flow state. So being able to kinesthetically feel things, but learning what to ignore as much as what to focus on. So actually very much transcending the multitude of information coming at you and learning where the focus lies, and then letting everything else subconsciously kinesthetically flow. And then you're just focused on the one thing. And his examples were fantastic, actually. And then being able to transcend some amazing feats, which you wouldn't even think are possible. Some of the things he'd achieved.
Yeah, it seems like, for me, it's almost like a letting go. We almost hold on too tightly, don't we? And you just get lost in that moment. You're just in that moment. You're not thinking about what might happen in the future. You're just right there at the edge of time. And it's an incredible feeling when it happens. You're right, Mark, to find flow. And you don't have to be jumping off cliffs in the Himalayas to find that. But it's great when you can.
I think actually, and just going back to Jeff's session, you know, one of the times I find flow quite often is kayaking, because it's that singular focus where everything else just disappears off, because that's what you're focused on, and your mind is just, and it's a very cathartic place to get to. So I think a very healthy place for people to do on a regular basis if they're able to.
So Mark, what was your final episode?
Well, my last session, my favorite session is essentially talking about imposter syndrome, and it's session 108 with Mike Christian, who is a HEMS physician. Mike's a fascinating and highly accomplished individual. He's a Canadian consultant doctor, but he's a physician with London HEMS. His original background was as a trained paramedic. He's worked on the SARS outbreak in Canada, and he's done quite a lot with the Canadian military. You know, as a paramedic, he made the decision to go to medical school and to become a doctor. And it was a conversation around the fact that Mike is, you know, demonstratively an accomplished physician. You know, he's got an amazingly varied and high-level background, but still considers himself to be an imposter and deals with that imposter syndrome on a regular basis. And I suspect that's not uncommon with lots of medics and physicians and clinicians. It was fascinating to get an insight into that vulnerability of somebody who is in a position that we would all look up to, and to understand where that vulnerability comes from. But it's also, for me, it was signature in terms of having a goal, having a vision and a dream, and following that, and just, you know, saying to yourself, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to focus on. And then following that dream and not giving up. And I found my time speaking to Mike, again, he was one of those he is one of those individuals rather that you could just listen to for hours, because his personal journey and his insights were fascinating. And again, and we've said this a few times, they're not just restricted to medicine. They're applicable to everyday life. And I'm always full of admiration, like with Dr. Victor Kande, with Mike, with a lot of the people that we speak to. They have visions and dreams, as we all do, but they decide to go after them. And the decision to go after them can be quite a small decision, but that then leads to the further steps. And I think it's part of, what we're trying to highlight all of us through these sessions that we're presenting on Webcast is that if you have a dream, there is absolutely nothing stopping you from achieving that except for yourself. And it's taking inspiration from some of the individuals that we've interviewed, and Webcast is full of these individuals, and making the decision to follow your own dream, whatever that may be, whether it's within medicine or without. But you have control of your own life and your own destiny, and you're shaped by what you aspire to. So Mike was wonderful to hear, and wonderful to hear his story, but also to hear that even having arrived where he is, he still feels that sense of vulnerability, which is a very human trait, and one I suspect lots of us benefit or suffer from.
For me, Mark, what struck me about that vulnerability.
Sorry.
After you, Eoin.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say I've worked with Mike a number of times as a HEMS physician on London HEMS and other places as well. And I think one of the things that comes forward from that session is around his attention to detail. And a lot of people say, don't sweat the small stuff, but actually it's sometimes prudent to sweat the small stuff and actually really be attentive to detail, both in your career and in your clinical practice. And Mike certainly is one of these characters that really is attentive. And it seems to be a commonality among some of our sessions with our NASA colleagues, such as JD Polk, and also Mike, would be actually be attentive to the small things, both in your career, clinically, and otherwise, because it's that matters and will aggregate towards you becoming not only a professional but a very accomplished professional.
Yeah, I think that attention to detail is actually fundamentally rooted in Mike's vulnerability. And what really touched me about that conversation was how his vulnerability is actually, that has become a huge source of strength for him. And I think maybe that comes from this idea of this imposter syndrome, being a paramedic before he became a doctor, always kind of slightly feeling he's not worthy of being where he is. And he's got a series of quite high profile jobs in the UK since moving from Canada. And I think that's given him both humility, and he reflects on that and how it's kind of kept him grounded. And it's also given him the drive to be the top of his game, to pay attention to detail, to continually improve himself, and never just sit on his laurels. Never, I think I've met lots of medics who are at quite a high level who got there and they just think, well, I am this person now. I'm kind of a big deal. Just sit where they are. Whereas he's just constantly pushing himself, and he's always grateful for where he is, and he's always investing in the next generation, trying to help them improve as well. So he's a very humble guy, and real joy to listen to him speak on this episode.
We, over the course of lockdown, in the silver lining was producing some of these sessions, because we truly have met some inspiring individuals in our sort of voyage through the different sessions and stuff. And I want to thank Will, yourself, and Eoin for collecting all these people and gathering them on the Webcast, because it's there's 113 sessions now, and we've got some remarkable sessions planned. It's been a real joy building up this sort of library of inspiration, accessing these mavericks, whether they're medics or otherwise. And there's lots of learnings in there. There's a whole load of other sessions I wish we could have had time to talk about, like the family session, traveling with kids. Oh, and just Lucille in Tahiti as a tropical medicine doctor. And I'm sure there's a whole list for you guys too. It's been a real pleasure being able to interview these people, and we've got great plans for the future. And then, Will, I know you've got a host of stuff coming up that you're involved with Wemcast.
Yeah, we've got. Well, I'm speaking to Rudy Van Vuren tomorrow on a live Wemcast, and then next week we've got military careers panel, and there's lots more stuff coming up as well. But I think for me, Mark, I feel like as hosts, and I hope also for you as an audience, and as an extreme medicine community, that we've all been on a kind of journey together. Through this pandemic, we've just been exploring some of the themes, or the things that extreme medicine can give all of us to help us practice extreme medicine on our doorstep and just be the best version of ourselves. And I just feel like I've grown immensely as a person. And we're all looking forward to the next steps on this journey. There's some really exciting ideas and speakers and content coming up. So we've got to keep watching this space.
Absolutely. And it's just been a pleasure walking through this journey with you guys. But also, so I'm going to be speaking to the captain of the English, the only British team to run the world's toughest race on Thursday. And that will probably be the next Wemcast podcast that will be coming out. So we'll be interviewing Joe Selby and just his challenges and also his tribulations, but also his victories throughout that whole process, which is now live on Amazon Prime, and was the WEM team which took care of the medical cover for that. So that would be a really fascinating conversation. But yeah, just harks back to really what we've been through this summer, and just listening to a whole catalogue of people who thrive through adversity in quite an adverse time in our lives. So, and that's really both helped, I think, me and hopefully you guys and the listeners on through a very difficult time in history.
So thank you for joining us for our review of our top sessions. Don't forget that we've got the WEM virtual conference on the 17th to the 18th of October. And of course, a lot of the sessions are also recorded visually and uploaded to our WEM Academy site, which is a growing library of some of the best extreme medicine resources that you can find. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Eoin. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode at Wemcast. Bye-bye.